Get it together, Wildcat. Hello world, and welcome back, or welcome if you are new here. I'm gonna get this out of the way up front. This video is gonna be a mess. There's not much that I can do about that. Let's just work with it. I am here today to talk with you about all of the books that I read in the first half of 2020. So everything January to June. It is currently July 1st as I am filming this. I had originally planned on doing a wrap up every quarter in 2020, so at the end of March, beginning of April, but thank you pandemic, that did not happen. So I am wrapping up the first 2 quarters, as I said, and then we'll see about whether I wrap up the next quarter or if I just do an end of year wrap up. We'll see. I don't know. I don't want to make any guarantees because I do want to remind everyone watching this that if you have not already today, go and sign some petitions, share some content from Black creators, donate monetarily if you are able to the Black Lives Matter movement in your local area, nationwide. There are plenty of other places that you can donate to, and or whether or not you can donate monetarily, you can also open one of the many fundraising videos and have that playing in the background while you watch this content. So do that, please. I have the wrong documents open. This is great. Before we get into all of the books that I read thus far in 2020, I want to go through a few stats. This is inspired by, oh my god, I don't remember her channel name. I have my computer in front of me. I can look it up. Bookish Realm. This is inspired by Bookish Realm. Every time that she does a wrap up, she includes some specific stats for things that she is trying to keep track of in her own reading, and I have been inspired by that. I am keeping some stats for my reading in 2020. It's not perfect. I definitely have an idea for some changes that I want to make, but it's also, I think, a good opportunity to utilize some of that data. And oh, I guess I should also mention that this is what my hair looks like as it is growing out. It's new to both you and me. I've never had my hair this short in my life, so I did not know that if my hair was a ½ inch long, it would grow straight up. But apparently that's what my hair does, so that's neat. Thus far in 2020, I have read 35 books, which is monumental for me. I will remind you, my reading goal for 2020 was to read 12 books. But I don't manage to read anything else for the rest of the year. I have still accomplished something huge for me personally, so. Of those 35 books, 6 were under 150 pages. The age categories that I have read thus far this year: 18 were young adults, 14 were adult, and 3 were other, which includes children's and middle grade. The genres that I've read thus far this year: 12 were science fiction, 8 were contemporary, 3 each were fantasy, magical realism, and a visual media of some sort, so comics, graphic novels, or manga. 2 each were horror and nonfiction, and 1 each were historical fiction and dystopian. You know, maybe I like contemporary. I'm reading a lot of contemporary. I have also, of those 35 books, read 29 different authors. Like 5 of those books alone are Sean McGuire, so this is getting into the reasoning that I wanted to talk about the stats at all, because I know that this is not necessarily interesting to everyone, but I wanted to use the diversity representation information to inform my reading for the second half of the year. So I have an opportunity to adjust the authors that I'm reading, the content that I'm reading, and read more broadly, which is what I wanted to do anyway. Of the 29 authors, 15 were white and 14 were BIPOC, which is not bad, not great. Definitely room for improvement. Of the BIPOC authors that I have read, 9 were Asian, 4 were Black, and 1 was Latinx. That's not super great. I can do better, and that's a specific goal that I will set out for myself. And the last statistic is the author gender diversity. Of the 29 authors that I have read, 30, wait, is this right? Oh shoot, did I do this wrong? Okay, one of these books is written by 2 people. That's why this is weird. 20 were women, 5 were men, and 5 were non-binary. Honestly, I don't even really know what to say about that other than I should continue to look for more work by non-binary authors. The document that I'm working off of for this video is is the Caw Pile spreadsheet designed by Book Roast. It's not perfect. There's some adjustments that I would want to make for next year. I'm gonna breeze through anything that I've talked about a lot already and link to other videos if you want to hear about any of these books in more detail. I will also include links to every single book that I have mentioned down in the description below. And by the way, there are some great resources there for how to support the Black Lives Matter movement, so be sure to check that out. January 2020, I finished Into the Drowning Deep. This was a book that I read primarily in December 2019. I was so close to finishing it, but I just couldn't do it, and I finished it in January, and it was magnificent. This is generally billed as science fiction killer mermaids. The thing that I would add in there is if you like Jurassic Park or anything that has that like new pulp kind of feel to it, definitely check out Into the Drowning Deep. It is extremely pulp. I also read Rolling in the Deep, which is generally referred to as a prequel to Into the Drowning Deep, but it's not because it was written first. It's a short story that's set in the same world. Into the Drowning Deep is a science mission to find what happened to this mockumentary cruise that went to go see if mermaids were real and then they disappeared. Rolling in the Deep is the mockumentary cruise that went to go see if mermaids were real. So it's just a little snapshot of everything going to hell on that ship. By the way, both of those books are by Seanan McGuire under the Mira Grant pen name. Next up in January, I read Halo Battleborn by Cassandra Rose Clarke. This is a YA novel set in the Halo universe. For those not familiar, Halo is one of my favorite video game franchises. And when I say that, I am only referring to the first 3 games because the rest are trash. I have a lot of feelings about Halo, and that played a significant role in how much I enjoyed this book. It's a bunch of teenagers who are on one of the human colony worlds that gets invaded by the Covenant. So it's them trying to survive, and they meet up with a Spartan, not Master Chief. He's a different Spartan, but still awakened all of my Halo Spartan feels. I don't know how I have done so well considering I only read 3 books in January. Moving on to February, I read Come Tumbling Down, which is the latest installment in the Wayward Children series by Seanan McGuire. Unsurprisingly, I absolutely loved it. For fans of Jack and Jill from the earlier installments of this series, this is continuing on from where we left off in Every Heart a Doorway. Then I finally actually listened to The Hate You Give by Angie Thomas. There's nothing that I could say about this because it's either been said better or just I'm really late to game and everyone has already said everything wonderful about this. 5 stars. I cried. Perfection. I'll leave some links down in the description for some more articulate own voices reviews of this work. Then I read the first 2 volumes of Heartstopper by Alice Oseman. I didn't have access to the bind-ups of this, so I read the chapters of the webcomic that are in volumes 1 and 2. It's a really cute story. Next, we can track when I got a NetGalley account because I have my first e-arc from NetGalley. This is Fairy Tales Beauty and the Beast by Jessica Gunderson. This is a children's graphic novel, so it's like a little children's introduction to classic fairy tales and literature. This was cute. I will link my Goodreads review of that down in the description below. Moving into March, I read The Way of the House Husband Volume 1 by Kousuke Oono. This is another NetGalley e-arc that I had the opportunity to read. TLDR, Yakuza crime boss retires to be a house spouse. His wife is working full-time and he stays at home to take care of the home and support her while she is working. It's super cute. I also read the first volume of the Avant-Guards by Carly Usdin. If you are unfamiliar, this is a really cute comic book series about a college basketball team that is very racially diverse. The protagonist is queer, so it's just really cute. Next up in March, I read The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet by Becky Chambers. This is the first novel in a series, the name of which I don't remember. I tend to prefer hard science fiction, and this is generally billed as light science fiction because it doesn't focus very heavily on the science. That said, it does focus very heavily on the various alien cultures, which fulfills that like sci-fi itch that I have, and it's so interesting. This is very much about the character relationships, the different alien cultures that are represented. and not so much about the plot. There's a little tiny bit of plot right at the end, but it's mostly about the characters and how they interact with one another and the found family of this ship. And there's also an artificial intelligence that is sentient. Some of you might recall that March is when the lockdown in the United States started. Once that order came through, I made the brilliant decision to immediately go and read Kingdom of Needle and Bone by Sean McGuire, again under the Mira Grant pen name. This is a short story about a global pandemic. I make good choices. This was actually really great. I gave this 4 stars. It's not super duper remarkable, but it was really enjoyable in the particular moment that I read it, because I needed that in that moment. Also in March, I had the incredible opportunity, I've already said this, to read Smash It by Francina Simone. This was a digital arc that I received through NetGalley because I requested it. I will once again leave Own Voices reviews linked in the description. Please, if you haven't done so already, subscribe to Francina Simone and pre-order Smash It. She is worth it, and Smash It is worth it. And that's all that needs to be said. Her content and the book speak for themselves. Also in March, I read a digital arc through NetGalley of Raising Them, Our Adventure in Gender Creative Parenting by Kyle Meyer. This is a memoir of the author's journey as a parent, choosing to not apply a gender identity to their child based on their anatomy, which is the path that my spouse and I have decided for our own child, and this was excellent. And the last book that I read in March was Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo. Oh my god! So I've already talked about this. I'm not gonna repeat myself too much. It was 5 stars. I loved the ending of this book so much. It was just so great. It was excellent. And now we are moving into April, where I participated in my first ever readathon. I participated in the magical readathon hosted by Book Roast. Friendly daily reminder that JKR is horrible and a turf. For that, I read The Raven Boys by Maggie Stiefvater, All Systems Red by Martha Wells, Meddling Kids by Edgar Cantaro, In the Shadow of Spindrift House by Sean McGuire under the Mira Grant pen name, I Wish You All the Best by Mason Deaver, Genshiken Volume 9 by Shimoko Kyo, Children of Blood and Bone by Tome Adeyemi, and Stardust by Neil Gaiman. I have talked about all of those in my wrap-up for the O.W.L.s Magical Readathon. You can go and check that out. Moving on into May, the first book I read that did not count towards the readathon I participated in May. Yeah, the grammar in that sentence was wrong. Moving on. First book that I read in May was This Is How You Lose the Time War by, I'm gonna mess up their names again, Amal-El and Max Gladstone. This was so beautiful. I loved it so much. It doesn't spend a lot of page time or any page time expositing anything to you. It just tells the story of this relationship by 2 rival time travelers, and they're trying to change history to meet their own goals. And it does not explain anything to you, and I don't care. It is beautiful, it is lyrical, it is excellent. And then the readathon I participated in May was the Asian readathon hosted by Reads with Cindy. For that, I read Shatter by Tahira Mafi, To All the Boys I Loved Before by Jenny Han, Midsummer's Mayhem by Rajani LaRocca, The Three-Body Problem by Cixin Liu. And I know that I'm not pronouncing that correctly, or at least I'm not pronouncing it the same way that the audiobook narrator pronounced it, but I don't remember how he pronounced it, and I'm on a roll with this video, so I'm not gonna look it up right now, so just, I know that I'm saying it wrong. Shatter Me was disappointing. This is not the right book for me because I have read X-Men and I have watched X-Men. And if you come from a place of having ever read and enjoyed or watched and enjoyed anything remotely related to X-Men, I think you're gonna be disappointed by this book. I don't even remember the character's name at this point, but she's Rogue. I'm not kidding. She has the exact same powers as Rogue. It's just X-Men. Why would you just not read X-Men? To All the Boys I Loved Before, I absolutely loved. This was really sweet. I, like everyone else on BookTube, loved the family dynamics that are in this story. But I will say, I liked the ending of the movie better. Midsummer's Mayhem, very cute. I would have enjoyed this a lot more if I was personally familiar with or a fan of Midsummer Night's Dream. I have not actually ever read anything by Shakespeare. I've watched a lot of adaptations of Shakespeare and I've watched a few performances of Shakespeare's plays, but I have never read a work by Shakespeare. And I definitely think my reading experiences would have benefited from a deeper understanding of the original work. That said, it's really cute and I do recommend it. The three body problem. Oh my goodness. This is such a tricky one. I wanted so badly for this to be 5 stars and it was not. I almost feel like I have to do a separate video about it because there's just so much. We're gonna talk about some things. Stay tuned. The end of May, I started reading Not Your Sidekick by C.V. Leigh, which didn't count towards any of the prompts for Asian Readathon, but it is by an Asian author and it has queer representation, so I thought it would be a nice little crossover book. And I finished reading it in June, so that worked out. In June, I was focused on reading books with LGBTQIA+ representation. I had a bingo card. It's here. I can show you. It's here. It exists. See, I did it. I got hi pen. I got bingo. I succeeded. Yay. In June, I read Not Your Sidekick by C.V. Leigh. I'm so angry with myself that I have had this on my TBR for years and never read it. I absolutely loved it. And there's a sequel, and I think there's a 3rd book in the works. This was so good. This was so good. This was so good. I love stories about superheroes. The Prince and the Dressmaker by Jen Wong, which is a graphic novel. Again, very popular on BookTube. I don't think I need to go into too much detail about it. Once and Future by Amy Rose Capetta and Corey McCarthy, who are married. By the way, I forgot to tell Dee that when I recommended this book to them, and oops, my bad. This is a science fiction, light science fiction, kind of fantasy, but it takes place in space. There's spaceships and there's like space opera stuff, so yeah, there's magic, but it's science fiction. Play on the King Arthur myth. The idea being that King Arthur keeps being reincarnated over and over and over again until he eventually defeats the world's greatest evil, and meanwhile Merlin is aging backwards to help guide Arthur along his destiny. In Once and Future, Arthur has, for the first time ever, somehow, this is the least plausible part of this book, been reincarnated as a girl. Somehow that never happened in all of the centuries of Arthur's reincarnation, but moving on. She's a teenager, she is an illegal immigrant from a planet called Ketch. She was adopted, and she's got her brother, and they're doing space stuff. I am doing a horrible job of explaining this book. I'm so sorry. Like, I would recommend it, but I also didn't love it. I will also leave information in the description below for anyone who wants to check that out. How many times am I going to reference you to the description? It is a mystery. Oh god, we're still in June. I read for the Juneteenth 48-hour Blackathon All Boys Aren't Blue by George M. Johnson, which is the wildly popular memoir by activist George M. Johnson. It was beautiful. I loved it. I really need to get myself a copy of it because there are notes that I need to make in it. The other book that I read during the readathon was The Stars and the Blackness Between Them. And I guess I'm just gonna take a pause from going through this and talk about that just as briefly as I can, because I have had to DNF that book. I got to about 45% of the way through. I didn't do a whole lot of research into the contents of the book. I just had seen it recommended several times. The content warning that I would flag is there is a cancer-like illness. That's not a topic that I'm triggered by, but the way that the story was going, I was not going to be able to appreciate it in any sort of way that it is intended to be appreciated, which sounds so vague and unhelpful. How can I say this without saying any spoilers? So this is predominantly a contemporary romance, but it incorporates some degrees of magical realism. The magical realism that it incorporates has to do with a spiritualism that I, as a white American, do not know anything about. Keeping that separate, what I could foresee happening, and I don't know because I haven't finished it, and I checked, I couldn't find anywhere online someone detailing exactly what happens at the end of this book, which is why I decided to stop reading it, because what I suspected was going to happen was the not cancer is either cured or to a degree effectively treated by non-traditional medicines. I have a very emotional response to non-traditional approaches to medicine because my parents are anti-vaxxers. This book deserves the praise that it gets. This book deserves the recognition that it gets. I am not the right audience for this book. I have too much personal baggage to give this book the star rating that it deserves. Okay, moving on. I need to wrap this video up. This is taking too long. Next, in June, I finished Symbiont by Sean McGuire under the Mira Grant pen name. This is the second book in the Parasitology trilogy. Do I like this book? I think that I do. I have complicated feelings, just a lot of thoughts, okay? Next, in June, I was blessed in June because I got a hold of Felix Ever After by Cassandra Calendar. This was also the 300th book that I marked read on Goodreads, so meaningless milestone for me, and it could not have gone to a better book. This was so good. Once again, I will link other reviews of this in the description. Obviously, I'm having a very emotional response to it, but this means a whole lot to other folks who are directly represented in this book, so I will link to those reviews. Suffice to say, everything about this book was great. I loved it. And the last book that I read in the first half of 2020 was The Future of Another Timeline by Annalee Newitz. I like it, but not a lot. I don't like it. I picked up The Future of Another Timeline because it was billed as time-traveling lesbians, which that's all I ever need to pick up a book, and clearly that is not true because there were a lot of problems that I had with this book, because saying it is time-traveling lesbians is true, but does not include any of the many content warnings that need to be included. Like, very early on in this book, within the first 5 chapters, I think in chapter 2, there is a graphic, disturbing, detailed description of an attempted sexual assault, a violent physical altercation, and then a detailed description of what happens to a human body in the first few hours of decomposition. And that's the beginning of the book. The trigger warnings do not stop. And the big one, the one that stuck with me because the scene in the book was so incredibly uncomfortable to read. Child molestation. So, like, remember how everyone in book 2 was all up in arms because there was child molestation in Ninth House? And yes, that was horrifying, but the way that it was written, like, it was okay. I was okay reading that. It doesn't get into a lot of details, like, you know what's happening very clearly, but it's not visceral. This was visceral. I wish that I hadn't read that. I am not happy with my decision to have continued reading that book. I kind of wish that I had DNF'd it. Also, one of the central plots of this story is abortion and abortion rights in the United States. There is also a description of an abortion medical procedure. Go into this being informed about the content warnings. And that's everything that I read. That's everything that I've read thus far in 2020. Am I actually gonna be able to read more this year? I hope so. I plan to, but like, what does that even mean? I don't know. I don't know what I'm doing anymore. Okay, I think that's everything that I had. I need to stop filming. Thank you very much for watching. There are resources in the description to support the Black Lives Matter movement. I'm gonna go do something else now. Goodbye.